In the bustling chaos of an airport, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams stands poised, her Navy uniform a testament to years of dedication and service. Yet, as she steps into the first-class cabin, a confrontation awaits that will challenge not just her patience, but the very assumptions of those around her. Will Naomi's unwavering resolve be enough to shatter the barriers of prejudice? Or will she be forced to fight yet another battle for her rightful place? Let's stick around to find out. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. If you enjoy this tale, don't forget to subscribe. Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams stood at the bustling airport gate, her dark brown eyes heavy with exhaustion. The weight of her recent overseas assignment clung to her shoulders, almost as tangible as the crisp Navy uniform she wore. Her fingers absently traced the gold stripes on her sleeve, a reminder of the years of dedication that had brought her to this point in her career. Around her, the airport swirled with a cacophony of announcements and hurried footsteps, but Naomi's mind was already on the comfort that awaited her. Earlier, an unexpected ping on her phone had brightened her mood, a notification of a first-class upgrade. It was a small luxury, but one she looked forward to after weeks of cramped quarters and grueling work. As she approached the boarding gate, Naomi allowed herself a small smile, anticipating the plush seat and extra legroom that would make the journey home more bearable. The line moved swiftly, and soon Naomi found herself stepping onto the plane. The narrow aisle of economy stretched before her, but she turned left towards the spacious first-class cabin. As she approached, a flight attendant with a pinched expression and blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun stepped into her path. "Excuse me," the attendant, whose name tag read Karen, said with a tone that was more accusation than question. "I think you may have made a wrong turn. Economy class is to the right." Naomi blinked, momentarily taken aback. She'd faced similar assumptions before, but it never failed to catch her off guard. "No, I'm in first class," she replied calmly, reaching for her boarding pass. Karen's eyes narrowed, flicking from Naomi's face to her uniform and back again. "There must be some mistake," she insisted, her voice taking on a condescending edge. "Let me see your ticket." Wordlessly, Naomi handed over her boarding pass. She watched as Karen scrutinized it, her lips pursed as if she tasted something sour. The other passengers in the first-class cabin began to take notice, their curious glances adding to the weight of the moment. "This must be a system error," Karen declared, handing the pass back with obvious reluctance. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to move to economy. We can sort this out once we're in the air." Naomi felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, a mixture of frustration and indignation that she had learned to control over years of similar encounters. She took a deep breath, centering herself before speaking. "There's no mistake," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is my assigned seat, and I intend to sit in it." Karen's face flushed, her customer service smile morphing into a thin line of displeasure. "I don't think you understand. If there's been an error—" "The only error," Naomi interrupted, her patience wearing thin, "is your assumption that I don't belong here. My ticket is valid, and I will be sitting in my assigned seat." The confrontation was drawing more attention now. Some passengers watched with open curiosity, while others pointedly looked away, uncomfortable with the growing tension. Naomi could hear whispers, fragments of conversations that made her skin prickle with anger and shame. "Maybe she won a contest," someone murmured. "Probably using someone else's ticket," another voice suggested. "I didn't know the military flew first class," a third chimed in. Each comment, though not directed at her, chipped away at Naomi's composure. She stood straighter, her military bearing becoming more pronounced as she faced Karen's increasingly hostile stance. The flight attendant's hand hovered near the intercom, a silent threat to escalate the situation further. As the standoff continued, Naomi felt a familiar weariness settle over her. It was a fatigue born not just from her recent mission but from a lifetime of having to justify her presence in spaces others deemed beyond her reach. She thought of her parents, who had instilled in her the strength to persevere in the face of prejudice. She remembered the challenges she'd overcome in the Navy, the barriers she'd broken, and the respect she'd earned through sheer determination and excellence. Yet here she stood, her accomplishments invisible beneath the color of her skin and the preconceptions of others. The irony of being questioned in her uniform, a symbol of her service to the very country that sometimes seemed to reject her, was not lost on Naomi. She felt her resolve harden, knowing that this moment was about more than just a seat on a plane. It was about dignity, respect, and the ongoing struggle for equality that extended far beyond this cabin. As Karen opened her mouth to speak again, Naomi steeled herself for what was to come. The flight was preparing for takeoff, but for Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams, a different kind of battle was just beginning. One fought not with weapons, but with unwavering conviction and the quiet strength of those who have faced injustice time and time again. The air in the first-class cabin grew thick with tension as the confrontation between Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams and the flight attendant, Karen, continued. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some pretending to be engrossed in their phones or magazines, while others watched the scene unfold with unabashed interest. The whispers that had started as a trickle now flowed more freely, a current of assumptions and prejudices that Naomi could feel pressing against her skin. "I've never seen someone like her in first class before," a middle-aged man in a crisp suit muttered to a seatmate, not quite loud enough for Naomi to hear. An elderly woman clutched her pearls, eyeing Naomi's uniform with suspicion. "In my day, people knew their place," she said, loud enough for several rows to hear. Each comment, though not directed at her, chipped away at Naomi's composure. She had faced discrimination before, but something about this moment, perhaps the exhaustion from her mission, perhaps the sheer audacity of being questioned in her uniform, made it harder to maintain her usual stoic facade. Naomi's mind raced, memories flooding in unbidden. She remembered her first day at the Naval Academy, standing tall among a sea of predominantly white faces, determined to prove herself. She recalled the extra hours she'd put in, the additional scrutiny she'd faced, always aware that as a black woman, she had to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. There was the time she'd led a critical mission, her strategic decisions saving lives, only to have a junior officer question her authority in the debriefing. Or the countless social events where she was mistaken for waitstaff despite her uniform and rank. Each incident had been a test, a chance to either break or grow stronger. Naomi had chosen the latter time and time again, but now, standing in the aisle of this plane, she felt the weight of all those experiences pressing down on her. The cabin seemed to shrink, the judging eyes of the passengers boring into her. She took a deep breath, centering herself, drawing on the inner strength that had carried her through far worse situations. Karen's voice cut through Naomi's thoughts, sharp and insistent. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you one last time to move to economy. We can't delay the flight any longer." Naomi met Karen's gaze, her voice low but firm. "And I'm telling you one last time that this is my assigned seat. I will not move." The standoff continued, neither woman willing to back down. Naomi could see the mixture of frustration and disdain in Karen's eyes, a look she had encountered far too often in her life and career. It was the look of someone who couldn't fathom that a black woman could rightfully occupy a space of privilege. As the tension mounted, Naomi's thoughts drifted to her recent mission. She had led a team through a complex, high-stakes operation, making split-second decisions that affected national security. She had earned the respect and trust of her superiors and subordinates alike. The irony of commanding a naval vessel one day and being treated like an interloper the next was not lost on her. The other passengers were growing restless. A businessman checked his watch pointedly, sighing in exasperation. A young couple whispered to each other, casting furtive glances at Naomi. She could almost hear their thoughts. Why doesn't she just move? Why is she making such a fuss? Naomi felt a familiar anger rising within her, an anger born of a lifetime of similar experiences. But with it came a sense of resolve. She knew that this moment was about more than just a seat on a plane. It was about challenging the assumptions that led people to question her presence in first class. It was about standing her ground, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong. She thought of her parents, who had taught her to hold her head high in the face of adversity. She remembered the words of her first commanding officer, a tough-as-nails woman who had told her, "In this world, you'll often be the only one who looks like you in the room. Make them remember you for your excellence, not your difference." As the confrontation reached its peak, with Karen threatening to call security, Naomi stood her ground. Her military bearing became more pronounced, her spine straightening, her chin lifting. She was no longer just Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams. In that moment, she was a symbol of resilience, of the fight against prejudice that continues long after laws have changed and barriers have officially fallen. The air in the cabin crackled with tension. Passengers held their breath, waiting to see how this standoff would end. Naomi could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment in their eyes, but she also sensed something else. A flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even shame, in some of their faces. It was as if her unwavering stance was forcing them to confront their own biases, to question the assumptions that had led them to doubt her place among them. As Karen reached for the intercom, preparing to escalate the situation further, Naomi braced herself for what was to come. She knew that whatever happened next would be a testament to how far society had come in terms of equality and how far it still had to go. The next few moments would reveal whether justice and reason would prevail or if the insidious tendrils of prejudice would once again assert their grip. The plane's engines hummed, ready for takeoff, but for Naomi and everyone in that first-class cabin, the journey ahead was about much more than physical distance. It was a journey into the heart of America's ongoing struggle with race, class, and the right to occupy spaces long denied to people like her. As she stood firm, Naomi silently vowed to see this through, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. As the plane ascended into the clouds, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams settled into her seat, her mind still racing from the confrontation in first class. The hum of the engines provided a comforting backdrop, but her thoughts were far from calm. She gazed out the window, watching the world shrink beneath her, and felt a familiar pang of nostalgia mixed with frustration. Memories flooded back, each one a reminder of the battles she had fought throughout her life. She recalled her first day at the Naval Academy, a day filled with hope and trepidation. Standing among a sea of predominantly white faces, she had felt like an outsider, a feeling that had haunted her since childhood. Yet, she had resolved to prove herself, to show that she belonged in this world of uniforms and ranks. Naomi remembered the grueling hours spent studying, the late nights spent preparing for exams, and the relentless physical training that pushed her to her limits. She had been determined to excel, knowing that, as a black woman, she had to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy. The pressure had been immense, but it had also forged her into the officer she was today. There was a moment during her training that stood out vividly. It was a particularly grueling day of physical training, and the instructors had pushed the cadets to their limits. Exhausted and on the verge of giving up, Naomi had felt a surge of determination. She had pushed through the pain, her mind focused on the goal ahead. It was in that moment of struggle that she had discovered her true strength, a strength that would carry her through countless challenges in her career. But it wasn't just the physical challenges that had shaped her. Naomi had faced discrimination from her peers, subtle and overt. She remembered the time a fellow cadet had questioned her presence in the academy, suggesting that she had only been accepted because of affirmative action. The words had stung, but instead of allowing them to defeat her, she had used them as fuel. She had excelled in her studies, earning the respect of her instructors and peers alike. As she sat on the plane, Naomi reflected on the countless times she had been mistaken for a waitress at military functions, despite her uniform and rank. Each incident had chipped away at her confidence, but she had learned to rise above it. She had become a leader, earning the trust and respect of her subordinates through her actions and decisions. Yet, the confrontation with Karen had reopened old wounds. It was a stark reminder that despite her accomplishments, she still faced prejudice. The irony of being questioned in her uniform, a symbol of her service to the very country that sometimes seemed to reject her, was not lost on her. It was a painful truth that echoed through her mind as she watched the clouds drift by. The flight continued, and Naomi found herself lost in thought. She thought of her parents, who had instilled in her the values of perseverance and dignity. They had faced their own struggles, and their resilience had inspired her to fight for her place in the world. She remembered her mother's words, "You are worthy, Naomi. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise." Those words had become her mantra, a guiding light in moments of darkness. As the plane leveled off, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that her journey was not just about her own experiences. It was about paving the way for others who would come after her. She thought of the young sailors under her command, especially the women and people of color who looked to her as a role model. Her actions today were not just for herself. They were for all those who faced similar discrimination without the shield of a uniform or rank. With a deep breath, Naomi pulled out her notebook and began to write. She documented her thoughts, reflecting on the incident and the lessons learned. She wanted to ensure that her experiences would not be forgotten, that they would serve as a catalyst for change. She wrote about the importance of standing up against prejudice, of challenging assumptions, and of creating spaces where everyone felt they belonged. As she wrote, Naomi felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She realized that every confrontation faced, every bias challenged, was a step toward a more equitable world. It was exhausting, yes, but it was also necessary. She was determined to continue this fight, to be a voice for those who felt voiceless. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, offering refreshments and checking on passengers. Naomi noticed the change in their demeanor, the way they interacted with her now. There was a newfound respect, a recognition of her rank and the dignity she had fought to uphold. It was a small shift, but it mattered. As the plane cruised at altitude, Naomi felt a sense of calm settle over her. She was not just a Navy officer. She was a force for change. She was determined to use her voice, her experiences, and her position to advocate for equality and respect. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With her notebook filled with reflections and a renewed sense of purpose, Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to dream of a future where her presence in any space would be unremarkable. A future where everyone, regardless of their background, could walk into a room and feel they belonged. As the plane continued its journey, Naomi felt a sense of hope. She was not alone in this fight. There were others who shared her vision for a more equitable world. Together, they would challenge the status quo, dismantle the barriers of prejudice, and create a future where everyone could thrive. As the plane leveled off, Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams felt a sense of calm wash over her. The earlier confrontation had been a storm, but now, as the aircraft cruised at altitude, she found herself reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. The tension in the cabin had shifted, and she could sense a newfound awareness among the passengers. It was as if her stand had ignited a spark of introspection, forcing them to confront their own biases and assumptions. Naomi glanced around the first-class cabin, observing the passengers who had once regarded her with skepticism. Now, their expressions were a mix of curiosity and respect. The businessman who had previously checked his watch was now engaged in a quiet conversation with the woman who had initially clutched her pearls in disdain. The young couple, who had whispered and stared, were now focused on their screens, but their body language had softened, as if they were processing the incident in a new light. Just then, Captain Jonathan Price reappeared from the cockpit, his demeanor more relaxed than before. He approached Naomi with a warm smile, his earlier concern replaced by a sense of camaraderie. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, his voice steady, "I wanted to thank you for your patience and poise during that situation. It's not easy to stand your ground, especially in front of a crowd." Naomi nodded, appreciating his acknowledgement. "Thank you, Captain. It's important to challenge assumptions, especially when they can lead to unfair treatment." Price leaned against the seat across from her, his expression thoughtful. Watching you handle that situation made me realize how crucial it is for those of us in positions of authority to actively support our colleagues and passengers. It's not enough to just be neutral. We need to advocate for what's right." Naomi felt a flicker of hope at his words. Exactly. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels they belong, regardless of their background. We can't just stand by and let prejudice go unchecked. The captain's eyes sparkled with understanding. I'd like to take this conversation further. I want to implement training for our crew that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Your insights would be invaluable. Would you be willing to help us develop this program? Naomi was taken aback by the offer. It was one thing to confront prejudice in the moment, but to be invited to help shape a response to it was something entirely different. I'd be honored, Captain. It's crucial that we address these issues head-on, not just in the airline industry but in all sectors. As they spoke, Naomi felt a sense of purpose rekindle within her. This was an opportunity to effect real change, to ensure that her experiences could help others navigate similar challenges. She thought of the young sailors under her command, the women and people of color who looked to her as a role model. This was a chance to pave the way for them, to create a future where they wouldn't have to fight the same battles she had faced. The conversation flowed easily, and Naomi found herself sharing stories from her military career. Moments of triumph and adversity, lessons learned from both. Captain Price listened intently, nodding in agreement as she spoke. It was refreshing to engage with someone who not only understood the complexities of her experiences, but was also willing to take action. As the flight continued, Naomi felt a sense of camaraderie with the captain that she hadn't expected. They discussed strategies for fostering an inclusive environment, the importance of representation, and the need for accountability. With each passing moment, Naomi felt her resolve strengthen. This was more than just a conversation. It was the beginning of a movement. Suddenly, the plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting Naomi from her thoughts. The cabin filled with gasps and murmurs as the aircraft shook. Naomi instinctively reached for the armrest, her military training kicking in. She glanced at Captain Price, who remained calm, reassuring the passengers with his steady voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be through this shortly," he announced, his tone soothing. Naomi watched as the passengers settled back into their seats, some visibly shaken but comforted by the captain's demeanor. It struck her how similar this moment was to the confrontation earlier. Just as she had stood her ground against prejudice, Captain Price was now standing firm against the turbulence, guiding his passengers through uncertainty. As the turbulence subsided, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that just as the captain had reassured his passengers, she too had a role to play in reassuring those who faced discrimination. It was about more than just her own experiences. It was about creating a culture of support and understanding. When the plane finally leveled out, Naomi turned to Captain Price, her expression serious. "Thank you for being willing to take action. It's not just about addressing incidents as they happen. It's about creating a proactive approach to inclusivity." Price nodded, his expression earnest. "I agree. We need to foster an environment where everyone feels empowered to speak up, to challenge biases, and to support one another. It's a collective effort." As they continued to discuss their plans, Naomi felt a sense of hope blossoming within her. This was a turning point, not just for her but for everyone who had ever faced discrimination. Together, they could create a ripple effect that would extend far beyond this flight. As the plane began its descent, Naomi felt a mixture of excitement and determination. She was ready to take on this new challenge, to be a voice for change in the airline industry and beyond. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she was prepared to face it head-on. When the plane touched down, Naomi gathered her belongings, her heart racing with anticipation. She had fought for her place in this world, and now she was ready to help others do the same. As she stepped off the plane, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to continue the fight for equality and respect. As Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams made her way through the airport, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The earlier confrontation had been a catalyst, igniting conversations that she hoped would lead to meaningful change. Each step she took resonated with the weight of her experiences, and she was determined to ensure that her voice would not be silenced. After boarding her connecting flight, Naomi settled into her seat, her mind still racing with thoughts of the day's events. She glanced around the cabin, observing the passengers as they settled in. Some were engrossed in their devices, while others chatted quietly. The atmosphere was markedly different from the tension she had experienced earlier. Here, there was a sense of camaraderie, a shared understanding that they were all part of something larger. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Naomi pulled out her notebook once more. She began to jot down her thoughts, reflecting on the impact of her confrontation and the conversations it had sparked. She wrote about the importance of standing up against prejudice, of challenging assumptions, and of creating spaces where everyone felt they belonged. Each word felt like a step toward a greater goal, a way to channel her experiences into something constructive. The flight attendant approached, a young woman with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Can I get you anything to drink?" she asked, her tone friendly and genuine. Naomi smiled back, appreciating the change in demeanor. "Just water, please," she replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It was a small gesture, but it signified a shift in the atmosphere, a recognition of her presence and worth. As the flight progressed, Naomi found herself engaged in conversation with the passenger seated next to her, a middle-aged man named David. He had been quietly observing her as she wrote, and finally he spoke up. "I couldn't help but notice your uniform. Thank you for your service," he said, his voice sincere. Naomi nodded, grateful for the acknowledgement. "Thank you. It's an honor to serve," she replied, feeling a sense of connection with him. David leaned in slightly, his expression earnest. "I saw what happened on your previous flight. It was appalling. I'm ashamed to admit that I've been in situations where I didn't speak up. Your courage inspired me to reflect on my own actions." Naomi felt a flicker of hope at his words. It's not easy to speak up, especially when you're unsure of how others will react. But every voice matters. We all have a responsibility to challenge discrimination when we see it. David nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "You're right. I've always believed in equality, but I realize now that believing isn't enough. I need to actively participate in creating change." Their conversation flowed easily, and Naomi found herself sharing snippets of her experiences in the military, the challenges she had faced, and the triumphs she had achieved. David listened intently, his eyes reflecting a growing understanding of the complexities of her journey. As they spoke, Naomi felt a sense of camaraderie with David. It was refreshing to engage with someone who not only understood the importance of the conversation but was also willing to take action. She could see the gears turning in his mind, the realization that change begins with individual responsibility. When the plane finally touched down, Naomi felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The incident on the previous flight had been a turning point, not just for her but for everyone who had witnessed it. As she gathered her belongings, she caught sight of David, who was now deep in conversation with another passenger, sharing what he had learned from their discussion. Naomi stepped off the plane, her heart racing with anticipation. She had fought for her place in this world, and now she was ready to help others do the same. As she walked through the terminal, she felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that her actions had sparked conversations and reflections that could lead to real change. In the days that followed, Naomi took the time to document her experiences in detail. She submitted a report to her superiors in the Navy, outlining the incident and the need for increased awareness and training on diversity and inclusion. She also reached out to Captain Price, expressing her gratitude for his willingness to learn and grow. Together, they began to develop a training program for airline staff, focusing on the importance of recognizing and addressing biases. Naomi's commitment to change extended beyond the airline industry. She began to engage with local community organizations, sharing her story and advocating for equality. She spoke at schools, inspiring young people to challenge discrimination and embrace diversity. Each interaction fueled her passion, reminding her of the importance of representation and the power of individual voices. As she continued her journey, Naomi found herself reflecting on the impact of her actions. Each confrontation faced, each bias challenged, was a step toward a more equitable world. She realized that her presence in spaces where she had once felt unwelcome was not just a personal victory. It was a testament to the resilience of those who had come before her and a beacon of hope for those who would follow. One evening, as she prepared for a speaking engagement at a local high school, Naomi received a message from David. He had taken her words to heart and had organized a community forum to discuss issues of race and inclusion. He invited her to be a guest speaker, and she felt a surge of pride at the thought of her story inspiring others to take action. The night of the forum arrived, and Naomi stood before a diverse audience, her heart racing with anticipation. She shared her experiences, the challenges she had faced, and the importance of standing up against prejudice. As she spoke, she could see the impact of her words on the faces in the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others deep in thought. After her speech, a young woman approached her, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said, her voice trembling. "I've faced similar discrimination, and hearing you speak made me feel less alone." Naomi felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "You are not alone," she replied, her voice steady. "We are all in this together, and together we can create change." As the evening came to a close, Naomi felt a sense of fulfillment. She had not only shared her story, but had also sparked conversations that would continue long after the forum ended. She knew that the journey toward equality was ongoing, but with each step forward, she felt more empowered to face the challenges ahead. As Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams boarded her connecting flight, she felt a sense of determination coursing through her veins. The earlier confrontation had been a pivotal moment, not just for her but for everyone who had witnessed it. She had stood her ground, and in doing so, had sparked conversations that would ripple far beyond the confines of the aircraft. Settling into her seat, Naomi took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought her to this point. The weight of her experiences pressed against her, but it was a weight she had learned to carry with pride. She thought of the young sailors under her command, the women and people of color who looked to her as a role model. Her actions today were not just for herself. They were for all those who would come after her, who deserved to walk into any space without their belonging being questioned. As the plane taxied down the runway, Naomi felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had made a commitment to herself to report the incident, not as a complaint but as a call to action. She wanted to push for better training, increased awareness, and systemic change within the airline industry and beyond. It was a daunting task, but she was ready to face it head-on. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, offering refreshments and checking on passengers. Naomi noticed the subtle shift in their demeanor, the way they interacted with her now. There was a newfound respect, a recognition of her rank and the dignity she had fought to uphold. It was a small shift, but it mattered. As the plane ascended into the sky, Naomi felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was not just a Navy officer. She was a force for change. She was determined to use her voice, her experiences, and her position to advocate for equality and respect. The journey ahead would not be easy, but she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. During the flight, Naomi engaged in conversation with the passenger seated next to her, a young woman named Mia. Mia had been quietly observing Naomi, and finally, she spoke up. "Excuse me, I just wanted to say that I saw what happened on your previous flight. I think it's amazing how you handled that situation." Naomi smiled, appreciating the acknowledgement. "Thank you. It's important to challenge assumptions, especially when they can lead to unfair treatment." Mia nodded, her expression earnest. "I've never been in a situation like that, but I've seen discrimination happen. It's easy to stay silent, but your courage inspired me to speak up next time." Naomi felt a flicker of hope at Mia's words. It's not easy to speak up, especially when you're unsure of how others will react. But every voice matters. We all have a responsibility to challenge discrimination when we see it. Their conversation flowed easily, and Naomi found herself sharing snippets of her experiences in the military, the challenges she had faced, and the triumphs she had achieved. Mia listened intently, her eyes reflecting a growing understanding of the complexities of Naomi's journey. As the flight continued, Naomi felt a sense of camaraderie with Mia. It was refreshing to engage with someone who not only understood the importance of the conversation but was also willing to take action. She could see the gears turning in Mia's mind, the realization that change begins with individual responsibility. When the plane finally touched down, Naomi felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The incident on the previous flight had been a turning point, not just for her but for everyone who had witnessed it. As she gathered her belongings, she caught sight of Mia, who was now deep in conversation with another passenger, sharing what she had learned from their discussion. Naomi stepped off the plane, her heart racing with anticipation. She had fought for her place in this world, and now she was ready to help others do the same. As she walked through the terminal, she felt a sense of empowerment, knowing that her actions had sparked conversations and reflections that could lead to real change. In the days that followed, Naomi took the time to document her experiences in detail. She submitted a report to her superiors in the Navy, outlining the incident and the need for increased awareness and training on diversity and inclusion. She also reached out to Captain Price, expressing her gratitude for his willingness to learn and grow. Together, they began to develop a training program for airline staff, focusing on the importance of recognizing and addressing biases. Naomi's commitment to change extended beyond the airline industry. She began to engage with local community organizations, sharing her story and advocating for equality. She spoke at schools, inspiring young people to challenge discrimination and embrace diversity. Each interaction fueled her passion, reminding her of the importance of representation and the power of individual voices. As she continued her journey, Naomi found herself reflecting on the impact of her actions. Each confrontation faced, each bias challenged, was a step toward a more equitable world. She realized that her presence in spaces where she had once felt unwelcome was not just a personal victory. It was a testament to the resilience of those who had come before her and a beacon of hope for those who would follow. One evening, as she prepared for a speaking engagement at a local high school, Naomi received a message from Mia. She had taken Naomi's words to heart and had organized a community forum to discuss issues of race and inclusion. She invited Naomi to be a guest speaker, and Naomi felt a surge of pride at the thought of her story inspiring others to take action. The night of the forum arrived, and Naomi stood before a diverse audience, her heart racing with anticipation. She shared her experiences, the challenges she had faced, and the importance of standing up against prejudice. As she spoke, she could see the impact of her words on the faces in the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others deep in thought. After her speech, a young woman approached her, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said, her voice trembling. "I've faced similar discrimination, and hearing you speak made me feel less alone." Naomi felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "You are not alone," she replied, her voice steady. "We are all in this together, and together we can create change." As the evening came to a close, Naomi felt a sense of fulfillment. She had not only shared her story, but had also sparked conversations that would continue long after the forum ended. She knew that the journey toward equality was ongoing, but with each step forward, she felt more empowered to face the challenges ahead. Months passed, and Naomi continued her advocacy work, engaging with communities and organizations dedicated to promoting equality and inclusion. She had become a sought-after speaker, sharing her story and inspiring others to challenge discrimination in their own lives. Each event, each conversation, was a reminder of the power of resilience and the importance of standing up for what is right. One day, as she prepared for another speaking engagement, Naomi received a call from Captain Price. He wanted to discuss the progress of the training program they had developed together. As they spoke, Naomi felt a sense of pride in the work they were doing. It was a small step, but it was a step toward creating a more inclusive environment for everyone. As she hung up the phone, Naomi reflected on her journey. She had faced challenges and discrimination, but she had also found strength in her experiences. She had learned that every confrontation was an opportunity for growth, not just for herself but for those around her. With a renewed sense of purpose, Naomi stepped out into the world, ready to continue her fight for equality and respect. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, the sky had never been the limit for Lieutenant Commander Naomi Williams. It was just the beginning of a much longer journey toward true equality and respect.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.